My future father-in-law sent a detective to track me and attempted to buy off our wedding. My future Phil hired a private investigator to stalk me and tried to bribe our wedding vendors to cancel because I reminded him of his ex from 40 years ago. I had 27 EVF never expected to be writing this, but I really need some outside perspective on my situation. I got engaged to my fiancé, Henry, 33M last Christmas, after dating for 3.5 years, and while everyone else is happy for us, my future father-in-law, Richard 65M, has been making our lives miserable ever since. I met Henry at a work conference where we were both speakers. He was funny, smart, and we clicked instantly. We started dating shortly after, and everything has been great between us. We've dealt with our share of challenges, living in different cities for the first year, career changes, and even a health scare when Henry got really sick last year, but we worked through everything together and came out stronger. Some background about Henry's family. His parents, Richard 65, M and Kimberly 61F, have been married for 35 years. They run a successful family business that Henry joined after finishing his MVA. Kimberly has always been warm and welcoming to me, treating me like a daughter from day one. Richard, however, has been a different story. Entirely from the moment Henry introduced me to his parents, Richard has been cold and distant. At first, I thought maybe he was just reserved or needed time to warm up to me, but after a few months, Henry told me the real reason. Apparently, I reminded Richard of someone he dated before meeting Kimberly, someone who apparently broke his heart. I know it sounds completely ridiculous that a grown man in his 60s would hold a grudge against someone just because they looked similar to his ex from 40 years ago, but that's literally the reason he gave Henry for not liking me. Over the past 3 years, I've tried everything to win Richard over. I helped Kimberly organize family events, showed interest in their business, always brought thoughtful gifts for their birthdays and anniversaries, and even learned to make Richard's favorite dish from Kimberly. Nothing worked. He remained polite but distant, often leaving the room when I entered or finding excuses not to attend family gatherings if he knew I would be there. When Henry and I started talking about marriage last year, he warned me that his dad might not take it well. I thought he was exaggerating. Surely Richard wouldn't oppose his only son's happiness over something so petty. I was wrong. The engagement itself was perfect. Henry proposed during our annual Christmas skiing trip, and I was over the moon. We decided to tell his parents first, since we were going to see my family the next day. When we arrived at their house, Kimberly was thrilled. She cried, hugged us both, and immediately wanted to show Richard the ring. But the moment Henry told his father we were engaged, Richard's face turned sour. When Kimberly excitedly asked about wedding dates, Richard interrupted, saying we needed to wait at least 5 years. Everyone laughed awkwardly, thinking he was joking, but he wasn't joking. Every time we met family or friends and they asked about wedding plans, Richard would jump in and insist we needed to wait 3 to 5 years minimum. He started calling Henry's relatives behind our backs, telling them we were rushing into marriage and that Henry wasn't ready for this commitment. He even reached out to my parents, suggesting they should talk to me about slowing things down. Things came to a head last week at a family dinner. Richard invited Henry's ex-girlfriend, Jenny, without telling anyone some context about Jenny. She and Henry dated briefly in college for about 6 months. It wasn't serious, and they broke up amicably when Jenny moved abroad for her master's degree. But Richard had always liked her, and apparently kept in touch with her all these years without Henry knowing. When we arrived at dinner and saw Jenny there, Henry was visibly uncomfortable. Throughout the evening, Richard kept bringing up Jenny's accomplishments, her successful career in finance, her recent promotion to partner at her firm, her new house in the expensive part of town. He kept making pointed comments about how some people rush into marriage while others focus on their careers first. Every time I tried to contribute to the conversation, he would cut me off or change the subject. The dinner got increasingly uncomfortable as Richard kept trying to force conversations between Henry and Jenny. He even suggested they should catch up some time to discuss career opportunities, since Jenny works in the same industry. Henry kept trying to shut down these suggestions, but Richard wouldn't take the hint. Kimberly tried her best to manage the situation, attempting to change the subject several times, but Richard dominated the conversation. I could see how embarrassed Jenny was. She clearly had no idea she was being used as a pawn in Richard's game. She made an excuse and left early, apologizing to Henry and me on her way out. The final straw came when Richard pulled Henry aside after dinner. They went to Richard's study, but the door was slightly open, and I could hear everything. Richard told Henry he was making a huge mistake and needed to reconsider his choices. He said I wasn't the right fit for the family, that Henry was too young to tie himself down at 33, and that he should focus on his career instead of rushing into marriage. He even suggested that Jenny would be a better match because she understands the business world better. I want to talk to Henry about all this, but I'm worried about causing problems between him and his father. Henry has always been close to his family, especially since he works with his dad. The family business has been Richard's life work, and Henry is supposed to take it over eventually. I don't want to be the reason for any rifts that could affect Henry's future. Kimberly called me yesterday and apologized for Richard's behavior. She told me that Richard had always been controlling about Henry's life choices, but she had never seen him act this way before. She also mentioned that Richard had been talking to other family members about his concerns regarding our marriage, telling them that I'm trying to rush Henry into marriage to get access to the family money, which is absolutely ridiculous. I have my own successful career and have never asked Henry or his family for anything. I honestly don't know how to handle this situation anymore. Henry sees his father's behavior, but tends to brush it off, saying, "That's just how his dad is and we should ignore him." But I can't help feeling hurt and disrespected. I love Henry and want to spend my life with him, but I'm worried about having such a hostile relationship with my Phil, especially since we'll have to interact with him regularly because of the family business. Update 1. A lot has happened since my last post, and none of it is good. After reading all your comments suggesting that Henry needed to stand up to his father, I finally showed him everything I had written here. Henry was shocked when he read about how much Richard's behavior had been affecting me. He immediately decided to confront his father, despite my concerns about the family business. The confrontation happened last Sunday when we went over for their weekly family dinner. Henry asked Kimberly to give us some privacy with Richard, but she insisted on staying, saying she needed to know what was going on. Henry started by bringing up the dinner incident with Jenny, and things quickly spiraled from there. Richard immediately got defensive and started attacking me and my family. At first, it was the usual stuff that I was rushing Henry into marriage, that I was after the family money, that I wasn't good enough for their social circle. But then he revealed something that left us all stunned. It turns out Richard had hired a private investigator to look into my background 3 months ago, right after we started talking about getting engaged. The PI had done a deep dive into my life and my family's history. Of course, they found nothing incriminating because there was nothing to find, but Richard had a way of twisting every normal life event into something suspicious. He pulled out a folder and started listing everything the PI had found. My parents had taken a second mortgage on their house 15 years ago to pay for my brother's cancer treatment. Richard claimed this showed financial instability. I had changed jobs twice in the past 5 years, moving to better positions with higher pay each time. According to Richard, this meant I was unreliable and wouldn't be faithful in marriage either. He even brought up my parents' divorce and remarriage from 20 years ago when I was just a kid, saying it showed poor family values. Kimberly was horrified. She had no idea Richard had gone to such lengths. She tried to stop him, but Richard was on a roll. He then revealed that he had been sending anonymous emails to Henry's direct supervisor at work, suggesting that our relationship was affecting his performance and decision-making abilities. Thank goodness Henry's boss had enough sense to ignore these emails and eventually showed them to Henry. The confrontation got really heated. At this point, Henry was shouting, Kimberly was crying, and I just sat there in shock as Richard continued his rant. But then something unexpected happened. In the middle of defending his actions, Richard broke down completely. Through his tears, he finally told us the full story about his ex, the one I supposedly looked like. Her name was Rebecca, and they had been engaged about 40 years ago before he met Kimberly. Rebecca didn't just leave him. She left him for his best friend Tom, and they got married immediately afterward. Richard had walked in on them together at Tom's house, where he had gone to discuss wedding plans. The betrayal was made worse because Tom had been like a brother to him since childhood. Kimberly was stunned. In their 35 years of marriage, Richard had never told her this story. She knew he had dated someone before her who had hurt him, but she had no idea about the details. But apparently Richard had kept this part of his past hidden from everyone, including his own wife. The revelation changed the tone of the conversation, but not in the way Richard probably hoped. Instead of feeling sympathetic, Henry got even angrier. He told his father that projecting his 40-year-old trauma onto me was completely unacceptable. He said Richard needed to either accept our relationship and apologize for his behavior, or stay away from our wedding entirely. That's when Richard played his final card. He stood up, suddenly calm, and told Henry that if he insisted on marrying me against his wishes, he would be cut out of the will and removed from his position in the family business. He even implied that he would make sure Henry wouldn't be able to find a job in the same industry given his connections. Henry didn't even hesitate. He told Richard that if he had to choose between me and his inheritance, he would choose me every time. He also pointed out that threatening his own son's livelihood over a personal grudge was a new low, even for Richard. We left after that, with Kimberly calling after us and Richard sitting in stony silence. Henry has been quiet since then, processing everything that happened. He's hurt and angry, but he's also worried about his mother, who's caught in the middle of all this. Kimberly has been calling and texting both of us, constantly apologizing for Richard and begging us not to make any hasty decisions. The situation at work is tense. Henry still has to see Richard every day at the office, but they're not speaking beyond what's absolutely necessary for business. Some of the employees have noticed the tension, and rumors are starting to circulate. Henry has started quietly looking at other job opportunities. Just in case, update 2, I need to share what happened in the past few weeks, because things have gotten even more complicated. After Richard threatened to remove Henry from the family business, Henry started quietly looking for other job opportunities. He reached out to some contacts in the industry and updated his resume. During this process, he needed to review some company documents for his portfolio, and that's when he discovered something disturbing. While going through the fire financial records he needed for his job applications, Henry noticed some irregular transactions in the company accounts. At first, he thought it was just normal business expenses, but as he dug deeper, he found a pattern of weird money movements. Small amounts between $5,000 to $10,000 were being regularly transferred to various consultancy firms that the company had never worked with before. Henry did some digging and found that one of these firms was actually the private investigation agency Richard had hired to look into my background. Another was a security firm that had no apparent connection to their business. Henry was able to trace several payments to these companies over the past few months, all authorized directly by Richard, bypassing the normal approval process. But the most shocking discovery was about our wedding vendors. Henry found evidence that Richard had been using company money to try to bribe our vendors to cancel our bookings. He had approached our venue, our caterer, and even our photographer, offering them more money than our deposits to cancel our dates. Thankfully, most of them had refused, and some even reached out to us to let us know what was happening. Kimberly was visiting us when Henry made these discoveries. She had been coming over more often, trying to mediate between Henry and Richard. When Henry showed her the evidence, she broke down and revealed something that put everything in a new perspective. Richard had been acting increasingly paranoid over the past year, not just about our relationship, but about everything. He had become convinced that his old friend Tom, the one who married his ex Rebecca, was trying to take over his company through some elaborate scheme. He had installed extra security cameras around their house without telling Kimberly. He had started checking her phone and emails, convinced she was somehow in contact with Tom. Kimberly had been trying to manage his behavior on her own, hoping it was just stress from work. Henry immediately confronted Richard at the office about the financial irregularities. Richard didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he claimed he was doing it all to protect Henry and the family's reputation. He said he had proved that I was working with Tom to infiltrate the family business. even though I had never even met Tom, and had no connection to him whatsoever. When Henry asked about the wedding vendors, Richard admitted he had already spoken to most of them. He had told them we were likely to cancel, and they shouldn't hold the dates. He even tried to justify using company money for all this, saying he was protecting company interests since Henry was a key employee whose judgment was being compromised. The conversation ended with Richard having a complete meltdown in his office. He started ranting about how everyone was conspiring against him. Tom, me, the employees, even Kimberly. The employees could hear him shouting through the walls. Henry had to call Kimberly, who finally admitted that Richard's behavior had been getting increasingly erratic and concerning, but she had been trying to hide it from everyone. Kimberly finally realized she couldn't manage this situation alone anymore. She told us that Richard needed professional help, but she had been hesitant to push for it because of how it might affect the family's reputation and the business. The board of directors is now involved because of the financial irregularities, and they've called for an emergency meeting next week. Update 3. This will be my final update on the situation. A lot has happened since the board meeting, and we've made some major life changes. After the board discovered the extent of Richard's financial misconduct, they gave Henry 2 options. Either take over his interim CEO while Richard took a leave of absence, or accept a generous severance package. Henry chose the second option. He didn't want to be involved in the mess that would follow, and honestly, we both needed a fresh start. Henry found a great position at a competitor firm in a city about 2 hours away. The pay is actually better than what he was making at the family business, and he finally feels like his achievements are his own, not just handed to him because he's the boss's son. We moved last month, and it's been like a weight lifted off our shoulders. Richard didn't handle any of this well. When he found out Henry was leaving the family business, he had another meltdown. He showed up at our old apartment while we were packing, demanding to speak to Henry. When we refused to let him in, he started screaming in the hallway about how I had ruined his family and turned his son against him. Our neighbors called the police, and it was just a huge mess. Richard then tried to turn the entire extended family against us. He called everyone, telling them that Henry had betrayed the family by abandoning the business and that I had orchestrated the whole thing. But his plan backfired spectacularly. Most of the family had seen his erratic behavior over the past few months, and this just confirmed for them that we had made the right decision in distancing ourselves. After what happened with the police, we decided to completely change our wedding plans. Instead of the big traditional wedding we had initially planned, we opted for a small, intimate ceremony in our new city. We only invited close friends and family members who had been supportive throughout this ordeal. Kimberly came alone, despite Richard's attempts to stop her. Richard spent our wedding day calling and messaging everyone who attended the ceremony. He left angry voicemails for Kimberly, demanding to know why she had betrayed him by attending. He even called my parents, accusing them of being part of some grand conspiracy against him. It was sad, but also confirmed that we had made the right decision in not inviting him. Kimberly has been visiting us regularly in our new city, though this has caused significant problems in her marriage. She finally admitted to us that she's considering separation. The board had insisted Richard seek help as a condition of maintaining any involvement with the company, but he refused, claiming everyone was conspiring against him. His behavior has only gotten more erratic since then. Henry still struggles sometimes with how everything turned out. He grew up idealizing his father in the family business, and walking away from both was harder than he expected. But he's also happier than I've ever seen him. His new job really appreciates his talents, and we're building a life together without the constant stress and drama. We've gone completely no contact with Richard. We had to block him everywhere after he created multiple social media accounts to harass us and started showing up at Henry's new workplace. Some family members think we're being too harsh and should try to reconcile, but they didn't experience what we went through. Sometimes I feel sad about how everything turned out, especially for Kimberly's sake, but I know we made the right decision for our mental peace and our future together. Henry and I are finally happy building our life together without the constant shadow of Richard's disapproval hanging over us. Thank you for watching. Write comments, put likes. Do not forget to watch other videos.